All right, so welcome to the next in the 67 steps, guidelines, frameworks to getting what you want out of life, the good life. So today we are going to talk about the sucker in the room and the Lollapalooza effect, using cognitive biases but not having them used against you. So if you watch any of my videos, if you're in any of the advanced business stuff or the VIP coaching, you hear me talk about this a lot. But today I want to kind of give it a sense. I want to give you a sense of it in the big picture of these 67 steps and habits. So a couple things are going on as you're going through this for the last month or so. One, you can tell that it's a strong emphasis that I have on the mind. Everything happens in the mind first, even to move your fingers, to move your hand. I was reading the book by Christopher Reeve, who played Superman, the actor, and then he was paralyzed in a horse accident where he fell off the horse, snapped his neck, and was told by doctors that no signal could ever be given. Literally, electric signal could happen going down, I think, whatever vertebrae or something. So he, of course, broke all the rules and was able, by the end of his life, he died of kind of an accident. I mean, he had a lot of complications, but he was able, towards the end, to swim in a pool somewhat, move his fingers, and he said mind over matter, right? It starts in the mind, and even if you don't believe in mind over matter, you still certainly, we know right now scientifically that before a millisecond before any action is taken, it had to have originated in the brain, and then you send the impulse to move your hand. So both physically everything happens in the brain, but then in terms of getting success, the same principle is at work. If the mind is not aligned, if the mind is not right, if the mental habits are poor, which most people are, then you will stay in a state of poverty, not just financially, but health-wise, love, socially, and in terms of happiness and fulfillment. So, there's this saying that I love. It says if you're playing poker, and if you're in a room playing poker with a whole bunch of people, and after 30 minutes you don't know who the sucker is, you are the sucker. So understand that the nature of life is somewhat competitive. It doesn't mean it has to be negatively competitive where you're taking advantage of people, but do not be so naive to think that there aren't forces at work to take advantage of you. I talk a lot about how the media does that. That's a huge source of people and things taking advantage of you. But beyond that, every person you encounter, especially people outside of your social group, we know one thing for sure. They have their best interests at heart. And I'm not even saying that negatively. Maybe that's the way it's supposed to be. Whether it is or isn't, that's how it is. So first thing you have to understand is you must take control. It doesn't mean you always have to be the alpha in the room. It doesn't mean that you always have to be the boss or cocky. It just simply means, like Rabbi Hillel said, 1,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, if I don't love me, who will? So you have to not just take responsibility, but really take the reins, the horns of life and move it forward. We've talked about that before. We talked about the plane, how Joel Salatin's dad said you got to land the plane. But what beyond you just consciously going, I'm not going to be the sucker in the room, right? You make that conscious decision. It doesn't mean you won't be the sucker. Conscious changes are, well, like Freud said, the mind is like a iceberg. 90% of it is below the water in your subconscious. So the Lollapalooza effect. Now, I talk about this a lot in the ultimate closing system, sales, greenbelt stuff. And you might not be in that. If you're an entrepreneur, you definitely should check that out because it's the best thing I've ever seen on persuasion, increasing revenue in your business, or as a salesperson, selling ideas, whatever it is you need to do, you got to persuade. But understand the inversion of persuasion is someone's always trying to persuade you. Always, every moment. You're right now seeing 2,000 to 4,000 ads per day in your life. It sounds like a lot. It is a lot. When my grandma was born in 1918, You're talking she might have seen 0 ads in a day. The only ads my grandma grew up seeing were maybe a newspaper. And, she didn't see, it wasn't something that she stared at. Radio wasn't really even started. So we're talking about in the less than 100 years of human history, we've gone from being relatively autonomous in our subconscious in the sense that we weren't being made the sucker at every moment in time. We were allowed to just live, okay? But now it's all different. Whether it's your phone, your iPad, your computer, radio, Pandora's going. I was at the Laker basketball game, and it's funny, I go to Laker games a lot, so I don't even notice, but I took a friend, Alex, one time, and he was like, do you realize how many ads were being watched? The cheerleaders, they wear Carl's Jr. cheerleading outfits with the big Carl's Jr. brand on it. That's subconscious. Sales through association, persuasion through association. If I'm not careful, I'm being made the sucker in that room, in that I'm like, oh, Carl's Jr. is trustworthy. Well, is Carl's Jr. really trustworthy? Is it really a company that has my best interests at heart with the food they're making? I doubt it. I truly doubt it. But yet, again, if I'm not careful, I'm the sucker in the room. Next, you have, at the Laker game specifically, you are surrounded by bright, flashy lights. Even the name where the Lakers play is called the Staples Center. That's named after Staples, the office supply store. So it's a continual game of us being persuaded to do things that are probably not in our best interest. Somebody's making money. I tell people, I'm like, music. We listen to music. The average young person now, I think I read it's 6 to 8 hours a day of some kind of media exposure, whether it be internet, music, YouTube. YouTube ads, they've got ads. YouTube has ads in between videos. You see that? Everybody's trying to skip them all the time. So, what's happening to you and I as these go on? Not only because we think we're just ignoring them, which at some level we are able to do. But if Freud was right, if most of the human mind is below the surface, then we're not doing a very good job of screening this stuff out. So, what's going on? Well, there's 25 cognitive biases that work on the human brain. I'm not going to list them all out now. We touch on them throughout the 67 steps. You have reward, punishment, liking, disliking, association, availability, Pavlovian responses, delusion, senescence bias, chemical bias, and so on, and so on, and so forth. When you get to the end, okay, there's something called Lollapalooza effect. Now, interestingly, great business people, maybe the greatest business people of our time, some of those guys like Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett, they say they never go to a auction. Why? They said you always lose at an auction. Think of what happens to you. You walk into an auction, there's a person on stage. Stat is the authority bias. So automatically, even subconsciously, they are perceived by your subconscious as an authority because they're literally physically above you. Then they're doing things like going once, going twice. They're creating scarcity and urgency. Like, ooh, if I don't buy this right now, I'm going to lose it. Even though it's something you've lived your whole life perfectly well with, perfectly well before you even heard of it. Still an influence on you. So then you've got urgency, authority. What else? You're sitting in a room with a whole bunch of other people competing for the same thing. That's social bias. That is, social proof. We are social creatures. Subconsciously, we're like, oh, everybody's looking forward. I want to look forward. What else is going on? You have the bias of reward bias, which is by and large the most powerful of all. They're selling something that you probably want, or you're not going to be sitting at an auction that has nothing appealing to you. So reward bias is happening. And of course, if you miss out on the auction, it creates pain. So All those things added together create what is called Lollapalooza effect. You and I can withstand the pressure of one cognitive bias. Somebody just calling themselves an authority by standing on stage. Okay, we can withstand that. But then what if they throw the other one in, the urgency and scarcity? What if they do social proof on top of that? What if they do pain, reward? All these things added together create what Charlie Munger has coined the Lollapalooza effect. And the Lollapalooza effect is a force too powerful, a coalescing of multiple biases all at once that are irresistible to the human mind. And that is why they say they don't even put themselves in that situation. It's not something you can build up willpower around. One of the biggest mistakes you can make is overestimate the willpower you have when it comes to withstanding the forces of the media, advertising, persuasion, and all those things. It's because it's not just media, by the way. It's also value systems, belief systems. So the first thing I want you to write down is irresistible forces are at work. You cannot just sit in a room, lift weights, read enough books, go in a cave, meditate, and suddenly become this enlightened being that's going to be able to withstand these. Buddha in Buddhism, that was the whole thing Buddhism is built around. It's like, well, if you do certain things right, you'll be able to detach from the senses. And maybe a few people in history have been able to pull that off, but they're so rare that it's like a lottery ticket approach. So what I want you to do is go, no, I'm going to get myself out of those situations. Generally means a reduction in the amount of media you consume. The news is full of biases. They're getting paid by ratings. Do you think that their primary purpose is just selling you or giving you information out of the goodness of their heart? Maybe it started that way. Maybe the original news people, and maybe there are individuals in the organization, but that is a corporation trying to make money. Now, I have no problem with corporations trying to make money. Just like when I'm playing poker, I have no problem with somebody else trying to win the game of poker. Okay? You cannot eliminate competition. You can't eliminate the reward motivation of corporations or of individuals. And a lot of people try to do that. They focus on Occupy Wall Street. They focus on pointing fingers black and white. That person's bad. They try to take advantage of me. The second you come to the standpoint of understanding most organisms are trying to take advantage of other organisms. Right now, you have viruses and bacteria in your body that if you didn't have an immune system that was strong enough, okay, they would take advantage of you to the point they may kill you. It's not because bacteria is bad or viruses are bad or parasites are bad. No, they're living out their own agenda. They're trying to thrive and survive. So you can't get angry at them. What do? Well, the analogy of bacteria is the best one. Sometimes you stay away from it, right? You don't, if everybody is sick, you don't go there in the room. You don't get the germs on you. You stay away from it. That's what I talked about, avoidance. Number two, because it's not realistic to stay away from all of it, you must strengthen your immune system. And that's what we're talking about today. The twofold. So the second thing is that you can work on strengthening your mind. The first thing is to know that you don't completely want to just expose yourself to as much of it. That's going where angels fear to tread. Right? So if there's horrible disease, you don't just go, oh, I'm not susceptible to smallpox and just throw yourself in and breathe air, or touch things that had smallpox on it. You try to stay away from it. But at the same time, you know that there may be a point when you're exposed, and at that point, you're going to have to be strong enough that you can pull it off, that you can survive. So, those are the twofold kind of approaches that mainly I want to talk about. In addition to this, one thing you can do, it's one of the books I recommend, Charlie Munger's book. It's on the book list on the website here, on my website, called Poor Charlie's Almanac. It's a great book. It's not the cheapest book you've ever bought, but it's amazing. You can also Google it. There's a few people I've tried to list out the speeches that Munger talked about. There's another good book called by Cialdini. He talks about a few of them, commitment, consistency. He doesn't talk about all the cognitive biases, but he definitely talks about a handful of those. So what I want you also to do, and this is the third thing. So the first one is avoid auctions, avoid massive intakes of media and sales. Number two, strengthen the mind. How do you do that? Well, you're doing it right now. You're going through the 67 steps. You're learning new guidelines and frameworks. And over time, these are going to strengthen you. Lastly, the third thing is cool. You can what I call Alexander the Great it. That means whenever you have something you fear or something taking advantage of you, flip it and use it to your advantage. So you can begin to become persuasive, to convince other people, to move people towards better ideas by using cognitive biases on them. Now, that's outside of the scope of this 67 steps. Like I said, you might be already in the closing system, the persuasion system, the social system that I teach. It's one of the somewhere here on the page. There should be a link to it. Especially if you're an entrepreneur or own a business or thinking of owning a business, you definitely want to know this. And that's where I actually go into how you can begin to use these to your advantage. Not to take advantage of other people, but to use them when the chips are down and you need to be persuasive, you need to move a crowd. You will know how to use those. Like I said, it's not something I want to completely talk about now because it's too long. This would be a 10-hour talk, but there's about 10, 15 hours of recorded material in that program. So other things that I think are important. Well, the fourth thing is just the realization of how competitive life is. For whatever reason, growing up, it depends. Remember I said you've been sold a various set of worldviews. These could be religious ones. These could be moral ones that may or may not be accurate. We know more now. Now, I'm not attacking religion or anything like that. What I'm saying is examine. I tell people, I forget what there was a great Christian writer who said, put Christianity to the test, because if it is true, it'll stand the test, right? So there's nothing wrong with putting things to the fire, because if something's gold, it will not be destroyed by the fire. You can't destroy gold with fire. It might melt, might change shape, but it's still gold. All the impure elements get burned away. And so one of the things you're going to have to do, which you're continuing to do as you go through this, is use the 67 steps and use this one in particular to understand that there's some false beliefs, and one of the primary false beliefs is that we have that the world is divided into good and evil. We like that in movies, we like that in history, but the truth of the matter is more likely than good or evil is that the world is competitive. War. When you look at war, what's the real cause of war? Some people blame religion, some people blame this or that. I don't think it's those things. Those might be what masquerade as the reason for the war or the competition. Generally, what causes war is just competition. People want. Japan attacked the United States in Pearl Harbor in what year, 1942 or something like that. Why? Because they were worried they didn't have enough access to raw materials, lumber, iron, rubber, and they wanted to take over Asia to get more things. They live on a little island. They wanted more resources. Germany, World War I and World War II. Expansion. They were worried that they were growing, that they wouldn't have enough resources. They saw the other powers, France, Germany, Russia, as taking, France, England, Russia, as taking a resource. So they wanted to compete. So one thing you have to understand, the reason it's easier for you to be made a sucker is not from a place of evil. Corporations are evil. The media is evil. It's not that. I don't say that. I just say they have their own agenda. So that's a great understanding that makes this not so negative. Like, people freak out. It's like, oh, everybody's trying to take advantage of you. No, every organism. And you can take this to the nth degree. There's a lot of scientists say even your mother and you. Mother's generally the person who loves you the most. But your mom did things that were she had to balance her own best interests against yours. Think about nursing. Your mom weans you, even though you would have wanted to continue to nurse, because it's not always, it's hard on a female body to continually nurse. It takes a lot of energy, a lot of nutrition. So they call, doctors call this, or scientists call this, I think, even in the womb, utero or uterus competition. You, as a growing baby inside your mom, you're taking resources. They say that they find evidence of even there a competition where your mother has to balance her own interests, keeping her body, with you as the baby. You as the baby want more. And that's why people say, oh, the history, why are humans destroying the rainforest and this and that? It's because each of us, myself and you included, are guilty. Not necessarily guilty, but we are clearly competitive. We want. So we're willing to make other people suckers, not because we don't like them or because we're evil, but because, think of this, right now there is a fire in your house, let's say, hypothetically. And you have a choice between your mother and another random woman you've never met. And you only have time to save one. We know. Or let's say you are a mother or you are a father. And there's 2 kids in there. One of them is your son or your daughter, and the other is a person you've never met. Who are you more likely to save? Richard Dawkins talks about in The Selfish Gene, the whole hierarchy. If there's 10 cousins in this, and lays it out very numerically and mathematically. But the point being, that not that you don't care about other people, but you want to compete and keep your own offspring alive. And so the good news is this dynamic of competition actually makes the world move forward. So you don't have to be the sucker. You don't have to take advantage of other people. You can pull it all together into a worldview and understanding where you actually, everybody wins. That's kind of what Adam Smith talked about, one of the fathers of capitalism. That's, I don't want to get into an economic debate, but one of the things that seems to be pretty accurate is that when you let people move in their own best interest within reason, they tend to work harder. If you have an office and you give a bonus for the whole group when everybody does well, then no one can control it for themselves, so they might all not work hard. But when one person knows, what I'm working on today, if I do this well, I get a bonus, despite the work of other people, he or she's more likely to work harder, right? That's not negative. You can use it to your advantage, okay? So a lot here, and some of this will tie in as we continue to talk through more of these 67 steps. But remember, don't be the sucker. Do not ever be the sucker. This is just like Sam Chupp, the Amish minister, told me. He said, Ty, 3 types of people in the world: people that make things happen, people who watch things happen, and people who wonder what happened. Don't be the sucker. You can make things happen. You can even sit back and observe, but don't wonder. Don't be like, well, I don't know why this person is doing this. I thought they were a good person, but they seem to be doing things not in my best interest. You're not going to be like that anymore, because now you have this understanding. So the question I want you to answer now, right here on the page and part of the community to round out and complete this 67 step. Number 1, what is a time where you were just sitting in a room in life, you were going through your life, around other people, you thought everyone had your best interest, but you turned out to be the sucker. Their competition took advantage of you. What's a specific situation? Number 2, okay? What is an example of you being persuaded? Okay? So the first one is you being taken advantage of. But the second one is you being persuaded. Okay? And what persuaded you? You have to know yourself. Some cognitive biases work better. Social proof doesn't work that well on me. Other things work better on me. Authority. Which of these, like I talked about in the auction, what works the most on you? Okay? And then lastly, talk about what you believe in light of this new information about whether the world is good, bad, evil, or if it's just competitive, and how that makes you feel. What are your thoughts? on this new understanding that the world's not so black and white, that it's more people competing, just like the father or the mother running into the burning fire and saving their child first. Is that evil? Is that okay? Seems to be what happens. So what are your take and thoughts on that? Okay? So thanks so much, and I will see you on the next of the 67 steps.